Hi everyone, it's Raina. So I am making this video about Chiron and Aries. Before I continue, I just would like to ask a favor of you. I have done this before. I have a new mic and I want to know if it's stuttering. Um, some of you were kind enough on past videos to let me know that everything was fine. And I was really happy about that. But then I was recording something recently and I right away went to test it to see, and it was stuttering. And I was like, oh no, what's going on? And this is my new computer, so it shouldn't do that. But I think it was because I had a bunch of windows open, so it might have slowed it down, and that's what's going on with that. So I'm hoping that that's all that was happening at that time. And if it's great, you don't need to let me know. But if it is bad, or if there's some kind of like skipping, stuttering, please let me know, because I don't want to start rambling on for an hour and then find out that there's all these glitches. And actually, that did happen one time. And some of you said, I can't understand, there were some words that got garbled. And I felt bad about that because I'd spent so long doing it. The other thing I'd like to ask you is if any of you works with iMovie. I have an iPad, so I am assuming it's going to be pretty similar to the MacBook iMovie program. I'm assuming that they're fairly similar. But if you could let me know how to take an MP3 and add one picture, it doesn't have to even be a slideshow, to it, and just have it go for the whole movie and to extend it to all the frames in a very easy way, I would greatly appreciate it, because that is, something that happened to me. I actually, at 1 a.m. one night, I did this Chiron video, and I just kept rambling on, and it was like an hour and 15 minutes. And when I went to try to make, a video of it, it didn't work, and it wouldn't even accept the MP3 on my tablet. And maybe there's some protection that they're doing, that they don't want a virus or anything like that. But it makes it a lot harder. And when I do try to make movies using MP3s that I record directly on my iPad, I have to like hold down the button to extend the image to all the the audio track, and it's ridiculous because you're talking about 6 seconds a frame. I have made movies that way that were only like 10 or 20 minutes in length, and it was excruciating. Like and I was thinking there has to be a better way. I just haven't figured out what it is, and I've looked it up online. So sorry to bog this down with those housekeeping requests, but that's really what I was going through my mind. So anyway, talking about Chiron and Aries. Well, I have formulated a theory, and we're allowed to do that. I think sometimes we think we have to go along with other people. We can come up with our own ideas about anything. And I was thinking about my own natal Chiron in the 11th house of hopes and wishes, but especially to me, friends and groups. And I have Saturn there, and how that has definitely been something in my life, of feeling like an outsider and not feeling that sense of belonging sometimes. And yet, when they say, oh, that's the trauma in your life, I think that's a little bit over the top. I don't believe that the house placement of Chiron is even necessarily as important as the sign it's in. So I'm using that theory right now because I have Chiron in Pisces, and I think that's more important than the fact it's in the 11th house, because we do have all kinds of trauma, and I would rather look at the sign that Chiron is in to see the theme of this trauma. And So, for instance, if you're like me and you have Chiron in Pisces, it can be, you probably have, Saturn in Pisces too. And it can be this feeling of victimization of, in general, and it can extend through different areas of life. And the trauma is not only feeling like a victim, but maybe other people saying, oh, you're so dramatic, you're just making a big deal out of everything. Like you're not allowed to be hurt by other people's actions. And to take that and not to turn it against yourself, or just to perceive yourself in that victim mentality in general, and to go through life feeling like you are empowered. And that might be the way that you heal yourself. And maybe, who knows, maybe that the house that it's in is the avenue to get to that place. But I want to focus on the sign in this video rather than the house placements. I might do that in a future video for you and show you where each of you is experiencing this Chiron transit. I'm also going to, but I don't want to do that here, in other words. I'm also going to talk about if this is your Chiron return. If you were born with Chiron in Aries, this is your Chiron return. By the way, Chiron is going to be in Aries until 2027. So it's going to be here for another 8 years. So, I was thinking that quote by Betty Davis, buckle up, it's going to be a bumpy ride. Well, is it? Aries can be a bumpy sign when it won't surrender, because there's a kind of an egoic insistence on getting one's own way. So anyway, in this video, I'm going to just talk about, in general, what this can mean for all of us as a collective. And we feed off of each other while at the same time being individuals. And so it's very important to see, but also the Chiron return. If you're somebody, I think you could even be as young as in your 40s. I've read around the age of 50 that you have your Chiron return. But it might be as young, maybe, maybe I'm wrong about that. And when it comes up to the degree of your natal Chiron, and maybe that is when it's to that degree. But I don't think so. I think that you could be in your 40s. So let's just say 40s and 50s, okay? All right. And so just to reiterate, Chiron is an asteroid called the Wounded Healer and is showing us our most tender part of ourselves. So, people who have this natally have a feeling, perhaps, of a lack of acceptance in terms of their identity, or that they don't have a sense of identity. So I hope that you can understand the difference between the two. The first one being that they may, let's say somebody is an artist and they have been born to parents who think that art is frivolous, that it's not essential in life. So therefore, to become an artist is probably the most foolish, inconsequential thing you could do with your life. And they may even be the kind of people who define themselves by their children's actions. And so they reject from their child what doesn't go along with their feelings that would make them feel more accomplished and maybe even part of a clique, part of a group, where they're trying to conform to or compete with other parents and what their children have been doing with their lives. So what that can mean is that it leads to this sense of the person feeling like they are not loved for who they are. So that's like that love is conditional. And also that they can't be who they are and receive positive strokes for it. The other way this can play out is not knowing who you are. So you kind of go from one thing to the other, one person to the other, looking for somebody to kind of define you, to lead you. You might call it inspire you. But it does seem like that's not having a true sense of who you are. The first house is the house of the self. So this can play out also if you have Chiron in the first house in any sign. So if you know your charts, it can have a very similar theme to Chiron in Aries. So when we talk about identity and feeling good about ourselves, it's coming from knowing who you are at your essence. If you define yourself based upon your family, your gender, your ethnicity, that's not knowing yourself. That's labeling yourself. It's a huge, 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 huge difference. There's a saying, I am that I am. And to me, that's almost like the Aries. I am that I am. The joys of the internet. I just looked it up. And the first thing I got was from Wikipedia. And they were actually talking about it, having a connection to a Hebrew phrase. They say it's a common English translation of a Hebrew phrase, which they translate, I am what I am, or I will be that which I will be. And they said, or even, I create whatever I create, which is interesting as well. But it's not simply just announcing one's presence. But to me, I don't like to read too much into this because it's going to go down a rabbit hole. But to me, the phrase means the fact that I exist in this form is no accident, and it's exactly as it should be. And that, and case closed. There's nothing else I have to prove, to do. I don't have to have a certain job in order to be acceptable to God. I don't have to do anything. I am that I am. I mean, you could even say the universe owes me a living. I've heard that phrase as well. And people will totally get triggered by that. But they'll think it's socialist. It simply means that if we are put here, then we will be taken care of. That has to be a logical place that you go to, conclusion that you draw. And when people do not know who they are at the fundamental level, they're flailing around. They're trying on different hats, and they're trying on different personas, and they are buying different products, trying to have bouncy hair, as many subscribers and followers as they can possibly get, and surrounding themselves with people who are constantly feeding back to them what they want to hear. But when you really believe that I am that I am, it's all about you. It's not about what somebody else says about you, even if it's good, because they could still keep you in that box. It's funny because sometimes tarot readers, astrologers go in different directions. And people saying, aren't you going to do that anymore? Aren't you going to, they want you to stay where they want you to stay. And when you know who you are, you know when it's time to move on and maybe go in a different direction. And even if people think you're the bee's knees, it doesn't mean that they are going to accept all versions of yourself. And the versions of yourself may be simply stripping down the layers of conditioning till you get to your core self that you can feel totally authentic about. And I think this is the pain that is Chiron in Aries, of feeling like you cannot be accepted at that core level. And this can come in a myriad of forms. But there are pitfalls in that same vein. Because, for instance, let's say you're gay and you feel like you're like living a lie. Even in 2019, you may have not come out. And you feel like if you do come out, you're not going to be accepted by those close to you. Maybe that's true. Maybe you know these people and you know that they are intolerant of things that they perceive to be different from what they normally are dealing with. And the temptation is to go in the opposite direction and then to identify all of your being as being gay. And this is what I see so often. And I see I'm going to call it the powers that be, but I don't mean that they control us ultimately. I'm just saying the people that are trying to control us and brainwash us, glomming onto that and really playing it up and telling you, yes, identify by your sexual orientation, identify by your gender, playing up the injustices, identify by your race and playing up the injustices. And then that person feels like, this is my identity, but not so fast, is it? It's really, it's a very subtle thing. So being able to perceive these things and not feel like broken by the possibility that others will not accept you, but actually being overjoyed and anticipating that sense of liberation that comes from living authentically is, to me, how you heal that. Because Chiron is all about healing at the end of the day. And it's also about being able to stand on your own 2 feet as an individual. If you think about the opposite house, which is the 7th house of committed partnership, this is something that is encouraged in our culture to, especially when you reach a certain age, when you reach adulthood, that you should have this partner and this person will be your helpmate and they will be there every step of the way. But we also we never lose our individuality. We all have individual souls. And this means we all have individual paths, even inside of a couplehood. And retaining that sense of self and not getting, not disappearing into your partnership, but actually having that other person validate you as an individual and not wanting you to just see yourself as part of a couple, but somebody who can go, maybe even go on separate vacations or go and have your own set of friends and not always have to socialize as a couple. That's what I see as well, is this pain that comes from the lack of individuation. And you can be a 50-year-old person and have this kind of what I would call an immaturity in this sense, a developmental immaturity, where you, and this is due to a lot of brainwashing, where you feel like you have to always be with your partner, and that there's something wrong with the relationship if you want to have a day by yourself, maybe once a week, want to see your friends alone, want to do, maybe even travel alone. Obviously, if it's too often, the other person will assume that you're trying to get away from them. But yeah, so the first house is about that, coming from that place of the self. But in order to get there, you do have to heal that feeling that you were not maybe rejected. Maybe you have been already rejected for not conforming to what others wanted you to. But if you can be the kind of person that stands tall and stands in your truth of who you are, then to me, you will have done this work and it will reward you. Not only through healing you, but through expanding your possibilities, perhaps. If you're somebody who does have your natal Chiron in Aries, you're having your Chiron return, as I said, watch for themes coming up along the lines of assertion. Maybe you have not embraced this, even if you have done personal growth work, and perhaps you need to take time out for yourself. If you're with somebody who refuses to see that life is a certain way, and they want to just live in their ignorance and their prejudices and things like that, and they don't want to give you that sort of positivity, then you have to still stand true to yourself, because that's what and we could say by extension that Saturn returns are similar, where these problems don't go away until you tackle them. And so with Chiron and Aries, this can be something where you feel like you're not receiving that outer feedback. And maybe I should have said you're still not receiving it after all these years. And it's interesting that the Chiron and Saturn transits or returns seem to come in our 40s and 50s. And I believe that I did not come, I read this, I actually read this, I don't know if they lumped them both together, but I certainly didn't come up with that on my own. I think they were talking about Chiron, but I would add Aries, I would add Saturn to this, and say Saturn and Chiron, you have your second Saturn return around the age of late 50s, so 57, 58, something like that. And with the Chiron, it'll be probably younger. But the point being that if we look at life as a series of cycles, sometimes cycles, it's like recycle. So recycling these challenges, these problems, and saying, what can we do to put this to rest finally? And it could be that this happens for you, where you're able to, once and for all, not allow other people's opinions of you to affect you. That's specifically with Chiron and Aries. Even the good ones, because that, again, could keep you playing small, because you may just say, oh, they love that I am a lawyer. Well, I'm not going to quit being a lawyer even though I'm unhappy, because I don't want them to think that I'm not successful. And so I'm going to, they keep praising me for and acting like I'm impressed for being a lawyer. And yes, I have gotten accolades, but it just isn't my interest. And that kind of thing where you are able to be free from the opinions of others. And this can make you much more, I think, first and foremost, confident in your choices, confident in that you are what you are, and there are no substitutions. There's no period. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about the situation. You are who you are, and you don't have to prove yourself. You don't have to give a documentation about what you do each day to anyone, give them some kind of a report, and you can just be who you are. So I'm going to leave it there, but I hope that made sense to some of you, and it'll be interesting to see at least the first, now that we're in those first early degrees of Chiron and Aries, of how it is impacting us, and maybe, in various houses. And like I said, I'll probably end up doing a separate video on that, but I wanted to kind of talk about it. And one last thing I want to say is that I've been noticing a trend of people who are not willing to live a lie anymore. So, we could talk about, private relationships and, leaving relationships one for the other. But I'm talking about career-wise, where you may, or a person may decide that they don't care if what they're doing is very lucrative or people are impressed by it. They want to do something that maybe doesn't even take training. Maybe they, or more likely their parents, spent thousands and thousands of dollars on college for a certain type of major, and they want to do something completely different. And sometimes that is when you find out that you don't want to do what your major is through actually seeing it up close. And yet it can be, by the time you figure that out, you may have already gone through most of your schooling, and then you just get on that hamster wheel and you just keep going, and you keep going around in circles because you feel like it's your obligation or whatever. So now people may be breaking free more because of the pain, because they can't take the pain anymore. So you see how pain can be sometimes the greatest healer, because it forces your hand. It makes you sit up and take notice and say something has to change here. And so if this is true for you, don't be afraid of any upheaval, any drama that is created by you simply being who you came here to be, because you may feel that now is the time to really become that person that you feel you are, and that you have seen little glimpses of in between a lot of sadness, frustration over a life that you're leading that really you don't feel belongs to you. With Chiron and Aries, that feeling of, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, these are my belief patterns. this is the kind of thing that you can feel like you don't have those answers to those questions. But this is a challenge to be able to pursue that on your own, regardless if you feel it isn't going to do anything or that it doesn't make sense to you for some reason. You have to be strong enough and allow the chips to fall where they may. And that could heal you as well. Okay. I hope that you enjoyed this. Take care. Bye.